Welcome to the Soul Series talk for May 2026. I'm Captain Pam Kingsley, Deputy Director of Starfleet Sciences, and I'm pleased to welcome one of our Starfleet members as our speaker today. Petty Officer Sam McEvoy from the USS Merlin is a major with the Royal Corps of Signals with the British Army, currently stationed in continental Europe. Picard had data, today's leaders have AI. In today's talk, Artificial Intelligence and Leadership, we'll look at whether we want to see an AI sitting in the captain's chair, or whether that remains a human-only endeavour, at least for the moment. I apologise that this recording starts a little bit into Sam's introduction. We had a few technical issues, but I hope you enjoy the talk.
True Star Trek style, if you don't have questions, then what you do on a science talk, should be all sorts of stuff that we should be going for. Before we kick off with the real sort of thrust of this next sort of 40 minutes or so, I'll just introduce myself. So, as Pam said, Major James McEvoy, but I go by Sam. I'm a serving officer in the Royal Corps of Signals, and that's a regular. So I do this for my full-time job. I joined the Army in about 2009, which seems a long time ago now. I can generally say that I've loved pretty much the vast majority of it, with some definite career highlights. I've been a troop commander, held at high readiness, so ready to go in sort of 48 hours notice to move anywhere in the world. Santa's instructor, so taught people how to do leadership, taking them from civvies to army officers. I've commanded a NATO subunit on operations, that was to Afghanistan, commanding and establishing 242 Gurkha Signal Squadron, which was me as the officer commanding of a formed subunit, learning a huge amount about leadership and being extremely lucky to command 106 soldiers and officers. So an absolutely fantastic opportunity, that one. And then you can see in the little picture there, that's me at the formation parade of the squadron. So having taken it from its infancy, built it all the way up. That was a fantastic opportunity for me. And one of the more surreal ones, I was the military advisor to the commander of UK Space Command. So my job was making sure that he was in the right place, right time, with the correct briefing materials. So a pretty eclectic career as well. Some particular claims to fame in there. I deployed the first use of artificial intelligence into an operational theatre for the British Army. So that was the first time it'd ever been done. I'll tell you a little bit about that in a while. And I've also deployed a quantum computer for defence for the first time. So I'm looking out for my hat trick of the next first thing I can get to do. But considering that I've got a degree in classics and philosophy, I've been extremely lucky to have a range of sort of leadership opportunities, getting to be really, really technical. And expand my knowledge of AI, quantum computing, all sorts of really weird, random things. In Starfleet International, I'm a proud member of the USS Merlin, Pam said, and hopefully some good questions from it at all. But Starfleet International has been a fantastic just for building like this fandom and for doing stuff like this. So I'm excited. One of the truly weird things, claim to fame, is I just had a chapter published in a book where I look at artificial intelligence and its use in just war theory. So making sure that wars are fought justly and in line with the law of armed conflict and things like that, and how AI can help us with that. So I do tend to get a little bit ethereal and a little bit conceptual in my sort of what I end up doing in my spare time, but very much looking at artificial intelligence, how it impacts humans. So that's a key thing about what I like to look at. Before we get started, it's worth just doing a bit of clarification. So when we talk about AI, there's no one set definition about what artificial intelligence is. And every time that we try and get a definition, it changes. Because effectively what we're doing when we talk about AI is getting a part of the human, putting it into the machine. So there's different subsets of this. So if we say that it's machines that perform tasks normally requiring human intelligence, especially when the machines learn from data how to do those tasks. So things like facial recognition used to be classed as like, well, that's a full-on AI thing. That's what humans do. It's very complicated for a machine to do. We'll be able to do it. And suddenly we've all got facial recognition on our phones. And it's just a standard thing. So the definition of what AI is has shifted. Sometimes we think that we've got it, but sometimes that definition shifts as well. Fundamentally, it's about taking something that humans do really well and putting it into a machine. So not just A plus B equals C, it's adding that little bit of extra so that the machine can come up with something a little bit different. But yeah, that's our definition. Well, I say it's a definition of AI. There's no real clear definition of AI as the fundamental takeaway for that. Effectively, it's machines doing something humans tend to do quite well. My first proper experience with AI was Exercise Spring Storm in 2021. This was the Estonian Defence Force's final exercise for its training year. So it's a big exercise where they get all their recruits out into the local area in Estonia. They will do it in amongst towns and villages and people, all that sort of thing. During this time, I was the SO2J6, so that is the staff officer responsible for communications and IT systems in 20th Armoured Brigade Combat Team. And we took out an artificial intelligence and used it on the exercise. When I say an artificial intelligence, it was a decision support tool. So we had an operational concept demonstrator. It was the first time we'd actually done this, and we took it out. And the idea was, so rather than a robot that's walking around or anything like that, what this was a system that used artificial intelligence to better support commanders' decisions. We managed to plug it into a network, make that work, and use that to absorb information and push it all around the battlefield. But there were several limitations with it. So kit is designed for a purpose. It's got to be small. It's got to be ruggedized. It's got to be able to survive in austere conditions. It's got to be able to be movable around pretty quickly. So if you're thinking about large server farms and stuff like that to support, not something we can deliver on the field. So size, weight, and power, or swap, were big considerations for us. How are we powering this? Is it small enough to be able to be usable for people? And can people actually get it around the battlefield itself? So in line with that, had to be deployable, it had to be robust. And when we're talking about what we plugged it into, what you can see there are some pictures of the sort of technology and kit that we're using for battlefield communications. So again, it is ruggedized, it's relatively old, but it's there and it works. The more complicated something is, the more can go wrong with it. This is designed to be nice, straightforward, simple, give you access to the systems that you need and work. But what we found was that we managed to absorb real-world data successfully. The way that we tested the kit was we used it alongside a manual planning cycle, so they can see a brigade staff sort of working through. And even in the 21st century, it is maps, papers, pencils, and we put the decision support tool, the AI, running alongside it and had a bit of a friendly competition. And our idea was, can it produce the same information faster and or better than what the human team came up with? We found that the results were pretty spectacular. Not for the whole planning system, I'll admit that. So towards the end, the humans took over and did very, very well. But what we found in the early stages, where we're learning about the battlefield and absorbing the information for humans to work out what the situation is, the AI did that far faster than human could. So there's real benefit to using AI, and something we're going to look at taking forward. We might be slightly behind in that because AI-enabled worlds are not that far away. So when we talk about AI, is that a new thing, or is it something that's been around for quite a while? So if you go back far enough, you can find examples of AI throughout history. So what you can see on the picture on the screen is a golem from Jewish mythology. But this was something that was made out of clay and could take to orders, move, obey the commands of priests. So not something that is traditionally AI, but it is an intelligence that is artificial, but not a computer one. Aristotle, who you can see in the middle there, created, in his philosophy, dreamt of replacing slaves with automata. So, effectively robots who could do the tasks of the slaves for them and therefore free up the human workforce. So not requiring slaves anymore. Sounds a bit like robots and AI. And what you can see on the right is the Turk, which is an absolutely fascinating story if you haven't heard it. But in 1770, a man created a chess-playing machine. What he had was, you can see a replica on the screen there, but the Turk was able to play chess against pretty much anyone who came up against it. Napoleon played against it. There were a whole load of famous figures, and it was able to beat quite a few of them. But fascinatingly, it could also work out when you were cheating. So the story with Napoleon is that he put down three illegal moves in a row, and each time the Turk would move the piece back to where it should be. Third attempt, smash the chessboard off, and he would say he refused to play. Which is a level of autonomy from like 1770 that is just absolutely phenomenal. The reason it's slightly phenomenal is because it was a massive fake. You had a chess master hiding in the cabinet underneath the chessboard. The idea was it was sold as an automated machine. So that I think there's something in here when we talk about AI going quite a way. There's been this slight fascination of replacing humans and getting machines to do something that was intelligent and human based. Clearly, we live in a very AI automated world. There's probably several people with Alexas, and I've just set it all off in your house, so I'm really sorry about that. But we've got digital assistants. There are smart houses and digital assistants throughout the world. That's a form of AI. If you have Netflix and you're getting all your suggestions of what to watch next, that's AI. It's based on your user data, what you like to look at. It also works out what you tend to click on. So different people will have different recommendations appearing on their Netflix screen. So some people like movie posters and they'll click on a movie poster. If you do that, you'll get more movie posters popping up. Some like faces. So, if you have a face and you tend to click on things more that have a face, make more faces popping up in your suggestions because it's learning what you like and learning what you tend to relate to. So it's AI in the real world as well. And clearly, we all know a bit about Google Maps and things like that, where that takes real world data, also historical pattern trends, and uses that to create your route. So it knows that at certain times of day it's busier than others, so therefore it will give you a different route than if you're traveling at like midnight when the roads are clear. That's artificial intelligence in action, and we use that all the time. Clearly, there's lots of other sort of applicable examples as well, but AI is becoming far more common in warfare as well. And Ukraine is doing a lot of stuff in the real world at the moment to use artificial intelligence as a force multiplier. So, it's pretty much the David versus Goliath approach, where you've got a smaller country that's bolstering its forces and adding resiliency and using automation. We can clearly see that with Iran as well. So Iran, kind of knew that America was coming for it, and so has built up a drone army and an automated force. So therefore, it's got a large amount of ability to do a lot more with a lot less, thanks to use of automation. So I will caveat that this stuff is automated when we're talking about warfare and the stuff that's being used in Ukraine and Iran. It doesn't mean to say that there aren't AI-enabled areas where it's being used as well in terms of planning and things like that as well. Clearly, Star Trek showed us an AI-enabled future quite early on. You've got the good, you've got the date, you've got data, and the EMH, where Starfleet clearly learned nothing from the M5 incident and decided that they were going to have AI from their ships. But you've got AI that is used helpfully and is able to supplement the crew and make better as a result. You've got the bad, we've got Badgie and AI from the future that's coming to take over, planets of androids, and the ugly as well, where all goes horrifically wrong and AI probably takes over with control or even the Borg, to a certain extent. There's several examples here where Star Trek has really looked at this and gone, well, hang on a sec, there's something we look at golems and automata as Aristotle came up with in the term, there's something about AI. How does this interact with us? And what does this mean for us and human interactions? This is something we're tackling in the real world quite a lot as well. So America is doing a huge number of tests to try and work out how to use AI and how it can enhance their forces. Sort of the things that they found is that there are certain times where you've got, they did a war game where you take a whole bunch of different teams and you have some that are, using no AI whatsoever and some that are using pretty much all AI. And they found that the more AI that you put in, the faster you were able to plan. And the more humans you had, the slower you were able to plan. Because humans tend to speak slowly compared to an AI. They tend to, debate and argue a bit more, and therefore they were slower going around their planning cycle. Why this matters from a military perspective is something called the OODA loop. So the OODA loop was developed by a US Air Force pilot, and he decided this is about how we make decisions. We tend to do this naturally and not think about it, but we tend to talk about it from a military perspective of going around the OODA loop. So you observe something, you work out what's happening, and you situate yourself to what's going on around you. You orientate yourself, and that's really working out how it's going to impact you. You decide on what you're going to do, and you act. So you observe something happening, you work out its impact on you, decide on your action, and you act. If you can travel around the OODA loop faster than your adversary or the enemy is going around their OODA loop, then you have the initiative because you're deciding and acting while they're still working out what's going on. So anything that can help you move around the OODA loop and make decisions faster has huge military benefit. It's all about innovation as well. So here you can see some stuff from Ukraine. This is effectively a drone that you buy off the shelf with a shell strapped to the bottom of it. You can see the zip ties if you look really carefully. Like there's nothing really fancy about this. This is done on the cheap. But AI and autonomy compress decision cycles. How quickly can you get this into action versus getting a soldier ready, kitted up, explain what you need to do, and move them out. So people who understand this and need to understand this move faster around the OODA loop than those who aren't. So using AI to make decisions and also to decide and act them as well. Well, clearly, use of AI never goes wrong. So Star Trek has sort of shown us this quite a lot. They thought about it quite a way back in the 1960s with the ultimate computer. And again, the thing I absolutely love about Star Trek and how you come up with all of this is that this was a time before AI was even widely accepted. So we knew roughly what AI was. There were no smartphones, hadn't got to the moon yet when this first aired. We had an idea of, well, what if there was a computer that was controlling the Enterprise and how would that impact us? And clearly, going by the episode, there's a lot of resistance to it first because, well, actually, you need humans, don't you? But the AI is able to do things that the crew of the Enterprise can't. It's able to react faster. It's sat there in the briefings, coming up with, well, we need these people for the landing mission. Pick someone, and Kirk goes, well, why have you picked him? He goes, well, because he did his gap year in this area of the sector, and therefore he knows about this planet, and therefore he's going to be on the landing mission. Level of granular detail that the crew just don't really have is able to come out from the AI, and so that's something that Star Trek was amazingly efficient about. Spock summed it up really well at the end of the episode. Computers make excellent and efficient servants, but I have no wish to serve under them. So Star Trek was very much there in the 60s saying, we really need to have a human still in the loop. Computers are good. We want a human to be there, front and center. And clearly, the Federation learns nothing. So they try the M6, M5 computer again, and you end up with lower decks and the Alido. The common theme that you tend to find throughout here is that AI routinely goes evil in Star Trek. Started off with the M5 back in the 60s, head into the 2020s, and the lower deckers are finding themselves in exactly the same situation. The question we have is, what would have happened if the AI hadn't have gone evil? If it was something that routinely just did the job far better than humans, what would that mean for humans? And we probably end up with this element from the ultimate computer. You've got the Commodore calling Kirk Captain Dunsall, with Dunsall being a piece of equipment that isn't useful for anything. The AI, routinely, M5 routinely says in the episode, doesn't it? The captain is not required. I understand what's going on. I've got this. I think there's a piece here about, well, if we do have AI and it does work perfectly, what does that mean for humans? Are we going to be replaced by them? So stepping away from Trek, we'll look at the Port of Long Beach. Port of Long Beach, second busiest port in North America. It handles about $200 billion worth of material a year. Okay. What is fascinating about the Port of Long Beach is that you can see the towers down at the bottom right of your screen. Uh, those are human controlled. So those are the towers and the cranes that unload cargo equipment from the ships. Those are the only part of the Port of Long Beach that's controlled by humans. So the rest of it is run by an AI because it's far more efficient. It's able to forecast things better. It's able to um, it's able to predict what needs to go where, what things are coming out, and the best place to put things. Um, it also means that there aren't humans who are wandering around, in the port where there are loads of autonomous vehicles moving about. Autonomous vehicles are big and hard. Humans are soft and squishy. The two don't mix very well, so it's reduced casualty rates and it's far more efficient. So even when we talk about the cranes, those are operated remotely by humans so that there's no humans in this area. The only time that a human needs to go in is when one of the machines breaks down and part of the port is sectioned off. The humans will go in. There's no machines moving around at that point. They'll repair the damage and then they'll leave again. It goes back to normal. So the question is, if we were to do a wire diagram of that and say, well, who's in charge and who's at the top, where would we put the humans and where would we put the AI? Because we'd like to think that the humans are in charge here, but it seems that the AI is running things and the humans are there to look after the AI far more than anything else. But the benefits are really obvious. Less injuries, greater efficiency. So it leads to a bit of a problem. Will AI change leadership? Who is in charge when we look at this? Would we take orders from a machine? Do we want to have Captain Picard in the chair, or is it time for Captain Data to take over? Why do we have that basis of what we want out of it? Do we want a human, or are we happy to take orders from a machine? So when we talk about leadership, we first got to define it. So I've cheated massively, and I've gone straight for the Army's definition of leadership, which it defines as the ability to influence or guide others. Okay. There's no really defined way to apply leadership. It's very much based on people. You can be very transactional and say, you're doing this because I'm in charge. You can be transformational and say, I need you to do this because this is the bigger picture and you're working towards it. But fundamentally, it's about a projection of personality. The leader is the person who has the idea, and they project things to make sure that happens. It's based on their personality. There's persuasion in there, there's compulsion, there's also example. Serve to lead is the motto of the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst. The idea is that you set the example throughout in order to lead people. It's also about translating intent into actions through other people. So the leader decides what they need to do, and turn that into actions for others. And it's fundamentally based on trust in the people under you, but the people under you trusting that you've got their best interests at heart and will look after them. In other words, it's all about taking intent and making it so. Um, but it's fundamentally people focused. It's about projection of personality. It's about having an idea and setting the example for it. It's very much the idea that people are central to leadership and you can't separate them from it. So if we look at the Army Leadership Code and we break it down even further, there's three things that leaders have to have, or characteristics. Those are leaders are things, they know things, and they do things. We look at what leaders are. Leaders embody the values and standards. They know their people and they have confidence and humour. There's probably no better example of this than Jean-Luc Picard in The First Duty. His wonderful speech to Wesley, the first duty of every Starfleet officer is to the truth. He sets the example for that because he lives that way every day. And it's a case of those are his values and standards and he embodies them. He sets the example throughout. Leaders also have to do things. And I think one of probably the most underrated leadership examples in the whole of Star Trek, it's an absolutely fantastic one, is from Benjamin Sisko, where he turns around and says, part of being a captain is knowing when to smile, make the troops happy, even when it's the last thing you want to do, because they're your troops and you have to take care of them. Okay, leaders build individuals, build teams, and achieve the task. And Sisko here is looking after his troops. He's setting another example for them, but he's building the team up. This is when he's trying to convince Wolf to go to a party in his honor. And Wolf doesn't want to go. And Cisco says, you've got to do this. You know, leaders do things, are things. But they also know things. So this is the part I really want to take a separate look at and go, what about knowing? So in Star Trek 2, you've got young Savick, on the bridge. The Enterprise has just been pretty much crippled by the Reliant. And Kirk has a little moment where he starts entering the prefix code to the Reliant, says to Savick, you need to understand how a starship works. Kirk knows what the starship does. He knows all the different parts of the ship, and he knows how the shields work. So he knows to enter the prefix code for the Reliant. Savick doesn't yet know that because she's still early on in her journey and she's not quite sure what he's doing. But Kirk has that knowledge. He has to be a leader in order to do that. And Field Marshal Montgomery, I think, summed it up really, really well. I reckon that soldiers will be more likely to follow a leader in whose military knowledge they have confidence than with much greater personality, but with not the same obvious knowledge of his job. Fundamentally, leaders have to know what they're talking about and know what their job is. They also have to think to the finish. They have to think right the way through to the end. But it's the ability to know a role inside and out. It takes humans a long time to do that. We spend a long time building up knowledge and working out how things work. We gather it over a career. And I think Star Trek 2 summed it up really well, because you look at the young cadet who's just at the start and doesn't quite know it. And Kirk has a lifetime of experience at this point. He's learned the hard lessons and he knows how this all works. He doesn't have that limitation. He's able to learn things pretty much instantaneously. And that can either be through feeding it in information, or it can run through so many simulations in a time that would take far more than it would take a human to do, that it can learn as it goes along far faster than we do. Just a random picture. This is very much related to something. So T. Lawrence in The Seven Pillars of Wisdom had a wonderful phrase. He said that 9/10 of tactics are certain and taught in books. The irrational 10th is as a kingfisher flashing across the pool, and that is the test of generals. So knowing will get you 9/10 of the way to the right answer. T. Lawrence was absolutely of the idea, Lawrence of Arabia was absolutely of the idea that irrational 10th is a spark. It is something almost ethereal and magical. And it's instinct. And that is what makes a general. That ability to look at something and go, I know what the answer is, and I see the way through this. So that's something that is based on knowledge, but there's something extra on top of it that is the deciding factor. Then he also turns around and says that this instinct is honed and sharpened by thought practicing the stroke. So it's not something that is just innate, it's also something that you have to practice and do. So if we're talking about instinct, can instinct be trained, or is it something that is, is Kirk a natural leader, or is it just instinct throughout? It's probably a slight word of warning when we talk about instinct and a gut feeling, in that we tend to look at leaders who've made it to the top and we say, hey, how did you get to this level? And they say, well, I trusted my gut, and therefore we tend to view that as that irrational 10th. But it's really important that there might be a bit of survivor bias here, on the basis that we don't ask the people who've lost it all, and in their company and are now living under a bridge in a box, because that's what's left. We tend to focus on the ones who have succeeded when they talk about the irrational 10th. We don't tend to look at the ones who have failed. Piece of ingenuity, that kingfisher moment. So let's examine that a little bit more. We talk about ingenuity is the quality of being clever, original, or inventive. How do you trust your gut when you don't have a gut is probably how I'd sum this up. That gut instinct, machines don't have that. But to me, if ingenuity is the quality of being clever, original, and inventive, then ingenuity is fundamentally linked to creativity. So let's examine creativity a little bit, because humans are really good at creativity. You just have to look back at our cultural history. the huge amount of great novels that have been produced, the wonderful symphonies that have come out, the fantastic plays that have spoken to the human condition. You know, these are all things that humans have done throughout history that are absolutely superb and a mark of culture, ingenuity, everything. Paintings as well. You know, just that fundamental piece of taking something out of nothing and creating something else is ingenuity and creativity writ large. So on that note, 4 numbers have appeared on the screen. The question is, which of these have been done by an AI? And which of these have been done by humans? So I'll give you a couple of minutes now to have a think, or have a little think, work out which one you think it is. Okay. Work out which one we think it is. So there's number 1, which is a person, number 2, which is a landscape, and number 3, which is a landscape, and number 4, which is something very abstract. You know, which of these could have been done by an AI? Which of these could be done by a human? If you said number 1, an AI produced picture, well done. There's a couple of things that might give away. The face is a little bit blurred, but my absolute favorite, if you look at the bottom right of the painting, um, the AI has decided to sign it with an algorithm. So it's signed part of the algorithm because it knows that humans tend to put their signature at the bottom of the painting. It's signed the painting just as well because that's what you're meant to do for it. Fundamentally unfair question though, because if you said 2, 3, and 4, you're also right because those were all done by AI. So there's no human generated paintings in here at all. The key thing there is, did you look at the paintings and go, well, which one is it? Do I have to go and try and work it out? Or did you go, they're all done by AI? Or did you have to think about it? And if you've got to think about it, it's close enough, is my argument. I'm going to say that, you know, we tend to look at things and go, well, actually, it might not be quite right, and we might get there eventually, but it's produced something that is enough to fool us. And if it's enough to fool us, how far away are we in reality? For number 4, there's a lovely picture of Ada, who was the AI who painted it, actually with her paintbrush, everything like that as well. You know, absolutely fantastic piece of technology. But she travels around doing art and painting. See, fantastic piece of technology there. So let's look at original thought as an AI. So this is a game called Go. Um, Go is a fantastically difficult game. There are more moves in a game of Go than there are atoms in the universe. So the amount of variations for every game is absolutely phenomenal. What you can see here um, is a representation of a game of Go that was played between AlphaGo and Lee Sedol, who was the number 2 Go champion in the world. You know, in fact, at the time, he was the reigning world champion. Um, and this was, we've all heard of the chess, Deep Blue taking on Chess Masters. This is a far more complex version because there's far more moves that you can do. The fantastic moment is move 37. So Lee Sedol has just done his move, and he goes out for a cigarette. And AlphaGo decides to place a black counter, which is the one that's highlighted on the screen on line 5. I'm going to put my hand up and admit I have no idea what that means because I don't play Go. It's far more brainy than I am. But watching the analysis, the entire crowd goes, AlphaGo has just made a mistake because you don't put something line 5. And you can see the commentators there going, what's it done? Okay, it's got this completely wrong. And it's just one of those learned human behaviors that putting something on line 5 is a bad idea, is a bad move. You don't do it. AlphaGo does it. Lee Sedol comes back and he sits down and he sees the black counter on line 5 and he smiles. And then about 30 seconds later, he's looking like that. Because that's the move that changes the game. And From that move on, the entire game shifts into AlphaGo's favor. And what's wonderful here is that this is something that a human just wouldn't have come up with. We don't know why putting something on line 5 is a bad move. It just fundamentally is what's baked into our consciousness. And 99.99999% of the time, it's absolutely a bad move, but not every time. Because AlphaGo didn't have that bias, that move was open to it, whereas it would have been automatically shut off by humans. There's loads of other examples in games where this has become really, really obvious. Innovation will give us a competitive edge, but it doesn't necessarily come from people. And AI has a fundamentally different way of looking at the world. So you have a game of Tetris there, which I'm sure many of you will recognize. There was an AI that was tasked to play Tetris for as long as it possibly could. Some playing the game, did a couple of games, was doing well, hit pause, just stopped. There's this thing of like, well, what's happened here? Because the AI had worked out, hit pause, the game went on indefinitely forever. It had achieved its objective of playing the game for as long as it possibly could. That's something that humans fundamentally don't think of. Looking at Star Trek, peak performance, Data takes on Kolrami at Stratagema. Kolrami is a Stratagema expert, and he takes on Riker. Riker manages to stay in the game for about 30 seconds, and then he takes on Data. And Data stays in the game for less time than Riker, piles in about 10 seconds into the game, and goes away, has a massive crisis of confidence. Picard steps in, gives him a motivational speech, and tells him that losing isn't a sign of weakness. That's just life. And Data takes on Kolrami again with a fundamentally different perspective. He tries not to win, to avoid losing. So every time that Karami sets a trap for him, it turns out that Data just does something completely different, and therefore the game goes on indefinitely, and Karami quits and leaves. Okay? So Data's managed to win there by doing something completely different, and that's original thought kicked in, which is something humans might not tend to go, because humans tend to play for winning. Data tries it a different way and tries not to lose, knowing that as an android, he can outlast Kolrami almost indefinitely. We have innovation like this in the real world. Ukraine is doing high-tech techniques in order to be a force multiplier. Iran is doing AI-driven targeting, 3D printed drones, the sort of stuff that you saw on Spring Storm right at the start. Decision support tools are running along in the background through both countries. It's a way for forces to stand up and be more of a force multiplier than they would perhaps necessarily be. It allows far more emphasis. AI doesn't replace ingenuity, it amplifies it, only if leaders integrate it. We've got almost the dream team here. How much better are these two together with Data and Picard than they are individually on their own? Data is a wonderful machine who's able to do an awful lot. He's able to process things far faster. You see Picard throughout the 7 seasons of TNG and the 3 movies and the Picard, spin-off series, guiding him and developing him to Data tries to be more human. The same token, you've got Picard who's able to trust Data implicitly, and he routinely turns to say, I need you to do this, and he uses Data really effectively. In First Contact, Picard needs the Enterprise computer locked out from the Borg. First thing he does is turn to Data, because Data is an android and can do things better than humans and can create multiple password locks. When we talk about ingenuity and we talk about data, is it real? It's very easy to anthropomorphize machines. I thought we've all had a shout at Alexa or Siri for various times, haven't we, for done things wrong. It's even more easy to anthropomorphize things when they're walking around on 2 arms, 2 legs, heads, and look like people as an android. We think of Data as alive, and Superman was a wonderful episode about trying to prove whether Data was or not conclusive point. Data, what isn't it, and not a person. It's a wonderful explanation on it. There's a big thing about, is data alive or does he just simulate being alive? I don't really know. To quote the wonderful Douglas Adams, if it looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, we have at least considered the possibility that we have a small aquatic bird of the family Antidae on our hands. Douglas Adams has one of the best ways of speaking I've ever encountered. But the point is, if it's close enough, perhaps you have to consider that it might be. And if it is, whether it's ingenuity or not, it's close enough. It's definitely an advantage to us. So what does that mean for leadership? Is it fundamentally a human activity? Is there a balance of emphasis here? We've spoken about the do, act, know divide. Is it that some elements can be better than others? Is it about handing over control but not responsibility? Would we hand over, make data captain, but Picard's ultimately still responsible at the end of the day? But would you take orders from a machine? And I think that's fundamentally dependent on the circumstances. I think there are times where you could really rely on a computer operating at speed and able to account for far more information than a human can. I think there are also times when you want that human touch and element. The perfect answer is probably somewhere in between. So will leadership change? I think leaders still need to embody things. They still need to do things, build teams. They still need to know things. They need to know their people and embody the values and standards. They need to develop individuals, but they also need to know a knowledge of their profession. We demand more from leaders. The world has got more complicated and it's moved on. Leaders need to know AI, and they need to know how to fuse this together. STEM and science, technology, artificial intelligence isn't a choice. Our world has changed, and we have to change with it. We're going to end up with humans and AI working closer together. Fundamentally, it's just IDIC. That is infinite diversity and infinite combinations. And it doesn't get far more Star Trek than that, I would argue. So the future is bright. We've gone from AI, computers as a small piece that is just a machine, just a servant. It is something that doesn't really think for itself. We're starting to move towards a time where, are they fundamentally human? Are they fundamentally alive? I'm not really sure. But I do think that AI will be fundamentally integrated into crews and teams, part of organizations in a way that makes them utterly indispensable to be without. Closing thought, AI will not replace leaders. People who use AI will replace those who don't. The advantages that AI gives you are just so fundamental and so insurmountable that if you decide to stay out of the game, you'll be left behind. So on that note, I'd love to take some questions or just have a discussion about it and thoughts and ideas from around the room. If you don't have any questions, it means that I did a superb presentation and ticked off every single box. I don't think that's the case, so I'm more than willing to have a chat. Eric, you got your hand up, I think?
Yep, I did. So here's I'm sure it's a quote I've mangled from somewhere, because I can't find it anywhere right now. The quote is it takes 1,000,000 men to train a general. Does that actually exist somewhere, or am I making it up?
I've not heard it, but I don't disagree with it. That's
So,
probably about right.
Because it takes 15,000 casualties to train a major general. So I'm pretty sure that AI, the introduction of OODA loop, change that, but how do you see it in?
It's interesting when you say casualties. I'd agree. I'd agree. People. I think in order to get to a general, you've had to command and you've had to lead people at so many levels, and you've learnt at each stage of that. So I mean, my first troop was 30 people. My squadron was 100 and three, a regiment is usually about 500 people. By the time you get to a brigade, it's about 5,000 odd. A general's moved through all those steps of leadership in order to get there, and they've learned at each point. So they all picked up lessons and have picked up a different point. AI being able to move around the OODA loop, that's a and I think that an AI is able to absorb the information from all those people so much more that actually what AI is going to enable people to do is allow people to almost be people more, which sounds slightly counterintuitive. What I found when we took the support tool out to Estonia was that AI is really good at certain things and humans are really good at certain things. The two don't always match. So AI is really good at calculating distances. Humans are really good at the analysis that sits on top of that. I think what you're going to find is that because humans aren't spending so much time in the minutiae of speed, distance, time calculations, they're spending more time doing analysis, and it's going to let humans think more. So is that going to help train generals? I think we're going to spend a lot more time with people doing the conceptual analysis piece, which is going to create a different breed of generals. Is that going to be better than the ones who have spent the time working out speed, distance, time count, and working out that vehicles break down all the time? Don't know. I think it's going to be a fascinating to find out. Does that answer your question? I went slightly around it.
Because you've struggled with it? It's a good question.
It was a good question. I like it a lot. Who's next? I think Captain Scott. I think you had a question.
Yes. With the Moon Shadow, USS Moon Shadow, Region 2, it actually is correct on that quote. It's actually from the U.S. Military War College. I served with the U.S. Navy for 15 years.
Oh, fantastic.
Yes, I served on the U.S. On nuclear submarines. And it does take the enlisted to train the officers, in my professional opinion, is how I started. I became enlisted before I was an officer. And worked my way up to I was in training for command of a submarine. And I started off in computers, by the way. That is my background. And with the precursor to AI, you came into service a little bit after I did. And I was getting out as you were coming in. So, the entire theater is changing, and but as is right now, AI is our child, and we need to treat it respectfully. We don't. I'd say this. We don't need to piss it off, and but yeah, the entire thing is changing, and it's changing in so many levels. Other levels that it is changing in terms of medicine and science as well, that we're using research models using AI. And there have been even using AI with the recent Artemis mission, and especially plotting trajectories, making sure Artemis is on course, was through a little assistance with AI. But yeah, it is changing on so many levels. We are seeing so many levels with the recent conflicts going around the world. That's something I've been taking a very keen interest in. But it is correct, and it's just we've got to treat AI carefully because eventually AI is going to outsmart us. That's what I hate to say. And that's why I've been watching it with particular interest. That's what I had to say.
Point about it being child, because there's a responsibility on us, but AI learns, and AI will learn from us just as much as it learns from information, but it also learns how we treat it and what we
Mhm.
like, adapt to that. It's an interesting one. You say that I think you're absolutely right, and that there will come a time when AI is smarter than us. I think that's quite an exciting thing. I think that's going to be a moment,
What
and it
one
all depends on how we react to it.
I did forget to mention, there was one other reference that could have been mentioned. The movie I, Robot.
Hmm.
I, Robot, based on Isaac Asimov's novel. And that one's been in my forefront um, for since I was a kid, you know. Mm, uh, but that's another one. Why uh, there needs to be humans in the loop, and that's a good takeaway from there.
I think it's a fascinating one. So humans in the loop seems to be edging slightly more towards humans on the loop. That humans need to be involved, but if we're too far in, we end up slowing down the AI, which is sort of the counter that we're trying to get to. But because an AI and it's the ability to decide faster than your adversary is such an important thing, we've got the idea is we've got to move faster. It's a fascinating view. Thank you. I think Pam, you had a question. I think. This is a fascinating one. Because so you've pulled out my other interest in my degrees, classics and philosophy, and I mainly did ethics. So here we go. Um, it's sort of because as humans we can't decide on what the ethical standard is. So throughout history, you've got and the study of ethical philosophy. We don't know what the right answer is about 90% of the time. So we are we going to teach it consequentialism, where we look at actually it's about almost the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. Or are we going to do deontology, where sometimes the needs of the one outweigh the needs of the many? Is it a rule-based system we're going for? Is it dependent on circumstances? Is it one that we do virtue ethics and the AI has to work out for itself what the right answer is? We don't know the answer to that either. But as humans, we can't decide what the right answer is. So trying to get the AI to do it is also quite difficult as well. But I think you're absolutely right in that how we give AI sort of ethical autonomy and the sort of decisions we allow it to make are really critical. So there's a drone called the X-47B Pegasus, which is used by the US Navy, I think. That is an AI drone. It can fly itself. It can do all sorts of stuff. It has a kill switch that enables it to use lethal force autonomously. That has never been enabled. Because the idea is that the enormity of taking human life is such that at the moment we still want a human to do it. We don't want that decision to be handed over just yet. And that ties back into the point about the human in the loop and on the loop. There will come a point, I think, where ethical decision making needs to decide, but as a species, we've got to work out for ourselves what it is first as well, which is a difficult thing. I think there might just be a point about we put our own ethical views on it, learns from us. It ties into that point about it's a child again, and we've got to keep looking after it.
Mhm.
It's probably slightly longer than we thought, but I think it's a really important point, and it's one that I find absolutely fascinating, in that we're still really struggling with this from an ethical perspective. Someone's quoted the three laws of robotics in the chat as well, which I think is a good way of looking at it as well. And Isaac Asimov, you can't go too far wrong. But someone's also made the really important point that there are ways around that, and it can conflict as well. And I think Kirk had multiple times where he was able to outwit a robot by getting multiple ways that it could argue with itself and create a bit of a feedback loop. No, it's it's definitely something that that's very much viewed from the servant mentality. But I think Asimov had the same view of like we shouldn't be using robots for war or for killing. Robots are there to make humanity better, not to do. And if you look at the I want to say the EU, it might be the UN, but they've created a standards for autonomy, and the idea is that I must make humanity better. Perhaps there was a thing here about an ideal world, it would all be about making humanity better. We don't live in an ideal world. The problem is that from a military perspective, AI gives you the advantage to create and act and move better with the adversary. And we're not moving away from that. It's almost the new arms race, I think.
Mhm.
Mhm.
They soldiers, soldiers, soldiers that you need maybe resources that go with it in order to handle the casualties. You're tying up more of your enemy's capabilities by just wounding them. So then I was also going to say that I'm not very far in my AI journey, but that they when they were taking the courses, they were talking about a lot of, particularly in terms of training data, and it's trying to pick out, more perpetrators. Yeah, you
Yeah.
know where I'm going with that one.
It's a really important point, and it's something that we routinely got wrong. And I think it's a really important one. We tie it into the go. Sorry, of course. Yeah. So the point was about the point was about talking about unconscious bias effectively and the bias that can creep into systems, especially when we're trying to do it from an ethical perspective. And there's some really good examples of this. I will get the company wrong because it's either Google or Amazon brought in an AI system to remove effectively sexism and prejudice from their recruitment process. And the idea was that they would look at, the qualities that were needed for an employee, and they would hire, and the AI would choose the candidates that you wanted to employ,
Mhm.
and there wasn't human bias in it, which was fantastic. But what they found was it recruited a bunch of males, and it wasn't looking at males. It wasn't looking at anything like that, but it looked at the education of the current board of CEOs and gone, well, this is what we want to get. And oddly enough, none of the current board of CEOs had been on women's football teams or been on, women's clubs. So it removed all of those people who'd done that from its CV roster and hadn't. And it's this wonderful idea that we're trying to get it right, But what's ended up happening is that we've introduced this unconscious bias. So our ability to look at it is very important. And one of the things that the Ministry of Defence is doing is looking at, well, the teams that we use to build AI have got to be diverse. It's got to have this. It's not a nice to have. It's a fundamental necessity of creating AI. You've got to have a bunch of people who think differently and look differently, who can look at it and go, well, actually, that information is problematic. That is an issue that we. Actually, one of the things that is worth mentioning as well when we talk about ethics is the piece I did on AI and how it can help just war. One of the conclusions that we came up with was that our intent for how we use AI really matters. Because if we turn around and say, well, actually, we want to just kill as many people as possible, that's a fundamental problem. If we can turn around and say, we want to minimize the amount of casualties, might be okay. And one of the examples that we look at in the book is targeting. So at the moment, we've got a drone that's moving, that's flying around. It's changing its height every so often because of the air. It's changing its distance to target just by flying. It's got you can launch a missile that can hit a target. There might be an opportunity. We do want to hand over the decision to fire to the AI, because the AI will be able to look at the collateral damage and see the fleeting moments of opportunity that a human is unable to grasp. If we turn around and say, well, that is a time that we have made the decision to hand over control to the AI to save lives as opposed to kill one, might be really justifiable. But, this is I'm not paid nearly enough to make that decision or make that call. So that is just a suggestion that we came up with in the book. It's something for people to think about.
Brilliant. One, so then they were Dune, of course, it's a big series that has history in Dune. They've talked about something called the Butlerian Jihad.
Not familiar.
Okay, so in a nutshell, at a certain point, they banned thinking machines. Yeah, don't do that. And they had to go through and wipe out these AI controlled planets. So yeah, that's where the Jesuits coming in and the stained limps. Essentially, the human computers.
Maybe. I mean, it's a wonderful juxtaposition to the Culture series by Ian M. Banks, where AI is fundamentally just embraced, and AI is smarter, but it's something that ultimately enhances the culture. It's inextricably linked. You can't have humans without the AI at that point. It's worth pointing out, Tim did put a question into the chat. Where does our current AI stand in the world with understanding the difference between the real world and the game? Will this change in the future? It's a really good question. It's not one that I am able to answer 100%, but the issue is that when we train an AI, we build a simulation for it. As far as the AI is concerned, that's its world. Like that, the rules of that are what exists. And it doesn't matter that there's something else on the other side. And I think there's a key thing here of when we build when we built the decision support tool, we were able to build a sandbox and simulate the real world, but we can't simulate everything. And the real world is far more complex than Go. Go is a wonderful simulation, and there's a wonderful, a range of moves that it can make. Fundamentally different. Each game is fundamentally different, but the world is even more fundamentally different than that. And an AI will always give us, when we use it for decision support, it will give us best a simulation. It'll be a really good simulation, but it can't account for everything. But when we look at that simulation, and as far as the AI is concerned, it doesn't know that there's anything beyond its simulation until you let it out in the real world. It's all conceptual at that point. I really like that question, Tim. It's good. It might be that. Or no, I'm just saying. I think we're there. I think there's maybe a couple of others, but hey, I think we are out of time. I'm afraid, aren't we? We didn't. Yeah, yeah, we didn't. But again, it wasn't so much running everything. But I mean, it's fascinating, isn't it? Because like using Copilot, we find that Copilot is good, but often I'll point and go, "That's wrong," and the AI will just go, "No, it's right." Fundamentally wrong. It's good.
Yes, actually, mentioned about war games having hallucinations. It does happen. I participated
Mm.
with RIMPAC a number of times. That is the international community's Pacific war games with the military, and yes, even through calculated decisions, there are um, hallucinations and migraines, as I would put it.
I
And
like the migrants comment.
yes,
It's a good
yes,
one.
it is because I saw. I mean, I looked over. I worked in the computer division, and I always saw my skipper uh, 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 with his hand stroking his temples. Is um, I'm too old for this bleep, and just
Yeah.
and it did happen a lot. Um,
Yeah, and it is an important thing. You make a valid point. Like hallucinations do happen 100%.
mm,
Absolutely do. We were quite lucky in that. I mean, it could just be that we didn't spot it, but we didn't encounter any when we did our test. But what we found instead was that the AI was good at working out stuff that we'd missed.
mhm.
And so because we were able to plug it into the network, there were little things like it would be, the vehicles that were connected to GPS would be driving along um, routes that weren't on maps. And so, we were there doing our planning on maps and pieces of paper and go, well, there's no routes there. And the AI was on, there is, the vehicle's just gone through there. And it was able to build that picture and plot it for us as we were going through our planning cycle. So it was almost like the anti-hallucination. We were the ones hallucinating. So it goes both ways. But yeah, I think it is absolutely to say that AI does make mistakes and it does hallucinate, it does get things wrong, but so do humans.
Mhm.
I had a good argument with Copilot this week. I need you to do this. I've done it. You haven't. Yeah, you go through it again and again and again. It is not infallible. Again, I think it ties into that point about the human in the loop / on the loop. That's why you're human. Yeah, the information that AI produces may not be. We're wrong to assume that it is. You've got to have a human to do this, and it should have that human element on top of it. It's not that where it can absolutely say things that are right.
Mhm.
So
It's a great conversation, though. I'd love to. Yeah, yeah. And I Jay, love to. Thanks ever so much for inviting me. It's hugely appreciated. And yeah, I'll wrap my brain for something. But thank you. Thanks everyone for all your questions. Really enjoyed it.